For joining us at Mama G on Web3 and digital parenting. And here we are again, my daughter Esme and myself, and we would love to talk to you today just about something very specific. It came across my mind as I read an article that was commented and commended highly by the author of The Anxious Generation, Dr. Jonathan Haidt, and he referred to an article by Ravi Iyer, which talks about what needs to happen in policy making for the principles to protect our children in this digital age to be established, so that we're no longer leaving it in the hands of the social media gurus, and we are able as societies, as governments, politically, to start to put some measures in place that will really craft a protective structure around our children, because we haven't had that for generation Z or Z. And I suppose I'm beginning to feel quite blessed and relieved in a way that although we are facing new pressures and new changes that our babies and children being born now have no experience and we have no precedent for, I think the good news for you and your children is that we've made mistakes with Gen Z, and we understand very clearly now the dangers of things like too much screen time and smartphones especially. So the measures that are coming in now should be in place, certainly by the time your daughter is even of an age where she could interact with a phone properly. And I know that you're cautious about her even doing that. So that's a massive head start for her and for Alpha generation generally. So it's great that we're moving forward and we're beginning to put things in place. I recommend the article. It's an interesting read, and it's very heavy on guidance for policy and for national change. So we aren't going to go into too much of that detail, but I would say that the goals and the principles that are listed in the article definitely worth looking for. And I'll just list one or two. One of them is that we have effective age verification. In other words, we don't rely on a 10-year-old to say that they're 16 when they're logging in and creating an account. There has to be much more of a protection around that being even possible to do. We also don't insist on people having accounts of their own. They can go onto places like YouTube and see content and usefully benefit from it without having to create an account that then immediately their parents have no access to. So we don't want to limit the content, we want to limit the creation of personal accounts for under ages. So there's a couple of examples there. Another one is a very popular idea that's been in the news a lot, which is schools having phone-free time from the first morning bell right to the end of the day, not even just during school lessons, but actually across break times, plays, and that the social connections that children have with each other are also protected, and they're not immediately looking at phones all through lunch break. So, you know, I do recommend this article, but what made me think this was worth discussing today with you is that it begs the question, what are our aims for our children? What vision do we have of their benefits, their welfare, their health, their well-being, what they might be like as characters? What are our goals for them? Because if we don't have those goals, how can we know if they are being able to achieve them or if they're falling short? How do we know if that vision that we have is being fulfilled? And there is a scripture, which I'll quote here, it's highly relevant, that says, without a vision, people perish. So without a vision we have as parents or carers, our children may perish because we haven't been able to protect that ideal of what we want for them. So the question I pose you is, and just talk around this, it may be not yet developed fully, But what do you think your vision is of how you want your daughter to be? If there's anything that jumps out at you from that suggestion, what would it be that you want to protect? That now you'll put the boundaries and the restrictions in place and the freedoms to allow that to happen.
There's probably a few things. Like, do you mean like a personality?
Yeah. How you think that should be formed, if you can affect that in any way, what would that be?
I think little things like obviously loving, caring, and things like with loving, you need to build relationships with people to build on that. So having screen time a lot kind of takes away that time for family time, where you could be building more of a relationship and a bond.
Yeah.
But caring's one.
So caring personality.
Yeah.
What advantages do you think that will bring to her? As I wouldn't dispute that being a caring person is a very good thing.
I mean, sometimes it might not be, because you could be too caring.
Yeah.
But, I think being caring is a good thing, because people probably trust you more, and find you, obviously this is later down in life, but more trustworthy in maybe job roles and more opportunities over someone else who wasn't caring.
Wow, you are thinking way ahead, and that's brilliant, because a mum will do that. You want to form a human that is going to be an effective member of society. Absolutely. Yeah.
Respectful, being respectful of others, understanding obviously people are different, but still having respect for that person, understanding that she's got two different backgrounds.
What do you mean, two different backgrounds?
Being mixed race.
Okay.
So understanding her background.
Yeah.
And understanding that there is other backgrounds out there, but still being respectful of that.
So in other words, are you saying that you want her to be non-prejudiced?
Not to treat people differently just because they come from somewhere else,
Right.
for example.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a standard. We will call it inclusive, maybe is a good word for that, which means that all embracing of differences and valuing difference and diversity. Yeah.
Yeah. Being respectful, but also knowing what's right and what's wrong.
Wow, you've opened a can of worms there.
Yeah, because obviously when I was younger, I don't know how you did it, but I grew up knowing I shouldn't do that because that's just not right.
Can you give me an example?
I can't think right now.
You're saying though that as a child or a young adult, which was it, you were clear about what you knew to be right or wrong?
Yeah, so with me being a woman, I knew that I shouldn't just go around sleeping with every single boy and things like that. And I knew you have to have respect for yourself.
Yeah.
That's just one example, but I knew what was right and what was wrong.
So that's the task you've got to face now. Yeah. And it will be pushed back. You know, every child will push back on what you want to say is right or wrong. But you've got that parental responsibility to define the rightness and the wrongness of the choices that she is going to make.
Yeah, it's just knowing how hard to push, because you don't want them to rebel because they feel like they're being trapped.
Yeah.
Or
I think I would say about that you have to be the authority in a very small child's life. And some would say that's mainly the mother's role, but then there comes a point when, certainly for younger boys, the father has to start to have more impact in terms of shaping that personality and character. I'm sure it's not any one size fits all, but as parent, whichever situation you're in, you are the one ultimately that has to say this is how far you go and no further. And sometimes I will not bring up one of the subjects that probably is the most memorable in your childhood, but there are points at which you have to say, look, no, that's it, finished, no conversation. You've overstepped the mark. There is a consequence. And there will be days where you end up having to do that, and it will, as they say, hurt you more than her, but she won't believe that. But you're the one who's holding to that ground because why? You've said you want her to be a caring person, you want her to be respectful. Is there anything else on your list of what you want to uphold for her future personality, character, identity? What else would you add, if anything, to that list?
To be intuitive.
To be intuitive, right? Okay, go on, say more. What? Give us an example of what you mean by being intuitive.
Like being able to read a room.
Okay.
I feel like I can kind of not judge, but can kind of read a person and what their intentions are.
Right. Wow. That's amazing.
And I always seem to be right. So
Do you? So I would also call that emotional intelligence. So you can, I would agree, you've always been an observant child, from very young, you've watched rather than commented or being quick to make a judgment about something. If you've had a judgment, you've probably held it to yourself. Whether or not that's changed whilst you've been assessing that perspective over time, maybe it's changed and you've thought differently, but I would say that you're still like that. You are looking at interactions between people. Is that fair to say that you will still do it of those that you know really well, like myself? Or is it also true of people, say, in a very public, strange environment like an airport? Can you read
I think it's
all of those?
Yeah, I think it's like with you, obviously, I don't feel like I need to be thinking, well, what's her intention?
No.
Because I know you've only got good intentions towards me and my family anyway. So that's not something I'd do, but I think it's strangers, obviously, it's not so much because you're not really interacting with them. But if, for example, you meet a group of people you don't really know, some of them, that's when you're a bit more eyes open to what's going on.
Would you say that you don't trust easily, though?
Yeah.
Right. Is that a good or a bad thing?
Maybe it's a bit of both.
Yeah. You
I'd
would
say-
like that to be passed on to your daughter?
I say I wouldn't want to trust people too easily because especially in this day and age, people do take your kindness for weakness.
Right. Yeah, it could well be. So if we put this back into context of your daughter being exposed in a world of influences that you don't always have control over, after a certain point, of course, because at the moment you have complete control. I guess up to a year or more, you are so much able to control that there comes a point when you have to decide, well, is this rule going to be reviewed? Is it relevant anymore? So I think what I'm saying to you is celebrate the fact that you've got a vision for your daughter. And I'm suggesting this to any viewers as well. Have a think about what your vision of that child and that person's future character is. I mean, I would use a biblical model because I think to look like Jesus is honestly the best character anyone could ever have. Who wouldn't want to be humble, gracious, loving, sharp-witted, and all the things we see? But certainly as a character model, know what you want to put out there as a vision for your child. And then you've got a clear idea of the boundaries of what that is and when it's going off track. And maybe those things will be needing to be reviewed as you go into different phases of your parenting, as your child changes from one age group to another. So my challenge to you and anyone who's thinking, wow, I'd like to do this, I'd like to record this somewhere, where are you going to write it down? How are you going to remember it? Perhaps make yourself some sort of purse, business card or something with it on, where you'll always keep seeing it and remember, or have it as a screensaver on your phone. We can't get away from those, can we? So that you have that constant reminder that you have this framework that you're really passionate about helping your child to become, but also with the realization that children will never be exactly what you expect them to be. And they'll have their own aspirations, their own ideals. But when it comes to digital safety and navigating the internet space and whatever comes of artificial intelligence with all that side of things, you will need to keep a tight hold on this. We're all catching up with each other, even as we grow in our parenting and grandparenting. Things are continually being invented.
Yeah, I know some people have trackers on their kids' phones and stuff like
Right.
that to keep an eye on where they are.
I hear the argument that a child needs a phone because they need to be safe, contactable, or able to call in an emergency. But there's an answer to that now, isn't there? There's the dumb phone.
What's that?
The phone which doesn't have any smart features, basically.
Mm.
I would almost like to say, I bet that by the time your daughter is 10, you will not be relying on a smartphone to track her. Because you will have worked out that those benefits probably outweigh by the negatives that we've seen happening to the mental health and attention deficits of the Generation Z.
Mm.
And more than ever, the data, the research that's coming out is saying, what have we done? And that is the generation we will look back on and say, what were we thinking? I mean, as this essay that I've referred to today by Ravi Iyer finishes, it says, we created the phone-based childhood. That's as against the play-based childhood. We can roll it back and build something better. So it's not just about phones, although that's become a really big focus in the media right now. But just take another example, AI. We don't even know half the time what is coming into our reels, if it's actually happened, if it's been filmed, if it's been invented. I don't know about you, but I've had a whole swathe of films of great big waves crashing into beaches and houses that would not ever have happened. It's just not against, it's just against all the laws of nature for those things to happen. We've had a recent news report of a pediatrician in Gaza whose 9 of 10 children were brought into the hospital dead from a bombing. Now we find out that AI was actually creating those images of her dead children. We have to know that we're going to have to keep interpreting, reinterpreting, making sense of this very, very misleading world of digital and virtual reality.
Mm.
So whether your daughter ever gets a phone might not be the major issue at that time. In a few years, there'd be something else more pressing. I think the message today is be clear what you want, for your daughter, for your child, for your grandchild, whoever we're talking about. Be really clear and have a agreed sense of a simple vision of where you're going with all your correction, with all your disciplining, with all your boundaries, with all your exposure to experiences and fun as well. What is the goal in mind? That's the bottom line. What is the goal in mind? Because we've had a whole generation younger than you, thank God you grew up before all this really started to erode our children's mental health. But the babies and the toddlers that are coming through now, hopefully we're not going to go too far the other way and not let them experience any of this.
Yeah.
But we certainly have a duty of care. So that's the message today. Just remind us again the 3 things that you think you see yourself wanting to be developed in your child's character.
Caring, respectful, and intuitive.
Wonderful. And I do see some of those things in you for sure. And I guess your partner will have other ideas of maybe what the character aspects are that he would value. But yeah, that's a conversation you can have between you and map something out, but be able to make sure that's flexible whilst it has to be firm. So we'll check out here. We've been talking about having a vision for our child's character so that we know how to keep them on track. In a humble way, we know we're not all powerful. We know that children do make mistakes and so do parents, but without a vision, our children perish. See you next time. That's Mama G on digital parenting and Web3.